Rachel walked the flight line alone, her boots grinding softly over sun-baked concrete as the first light of dawn cracked the horizon. Her flight suit was already streaked with sweat and grit, the back of her neck damp beneath her braid. She carried her helmet under one arm, the visor sealed shut, the surface polished not for appearance, but from repetition. Across the tarmac, a gust stirred loose sand into a slow-moving swirl that caught the early light, then drifted away without urgency. She didn't look up. She knew what the sky would offer her today. It hadn't changed. The fighter waited at the far end of the ramp, its nose pointed toward a blur of open blue. The weapons were already loaded, twin racks under each wing gleaming in the rising sun, fins secured, guidance heads powered but quiet. A ground tech stepped away from the ladder as Rachel approached, wiping his hands on a rag already stained with oil. He nodded without speaking, the kind of nod given to someone whose mind had already left the earth. Rachel paused beside the left intake and placed her free hand against the metal skin. It was warm. Systems had been tested. No surprises waited inside. That knowledge didn't reassure her. It simply confirmed readiness. That was all she needed. Inside the pre-dawn hangar office, the final briefing had been short. Intelligence had located a high-value enemy commander inside a fortified desert base. The opportunity was narrow. The convoy was packing for departure. Once they moved, the lead would go cold. Surface to air coverage was dense. Enemy interceptors were already airborne. There would be no loitering, no circling. The strike had to be immediate, exact, and final. Command made it clear. There was a high probability Rachel would not return. That statement had been repeated 3 times. She hadn't asked questions. She hadn't responded. She had nodded once. Then she left the room. Now, on the flight line, with the jet warming in front of her, the flight chief approached with slow, deliberate steps. He said nothing for a few seconds. Then he pointed toward the ground cart holding the optional wing tank. "We can hang the extra fuel," he said, "if you think you might need time on the back end." Rachel glanced at the tank, then looked back at him. Her answer came quiet. "Even, I won't." The chief studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod and turned away. No persuasion, no protest, just understanding. She climbed the ladder in silence. The rungs were warm. Her movements were measured, steady. Inside the cockpit, she settled into the seat and began strapping in without pause. The checklist was clipped to the left panel. She didn't touch it. She had already run through everything in her mind twice. She reached for each switch without hesitation. Power flowed through the systems, with a subtle hum. She sealed her gloves, pulled her harness tight, and lowered the helmet over her head. The visor stayed down. Beyond the nose of the aircraft, the desert was starting to glow. The upper edge of the cloud line had turned pale gold. A heat shimmer had begun to dance just above the horizon. She didn't react to the view. She watched it without attachment, as if she were already somewhere else. She keyed the startup. The turbine wound up in a sequence of rising notes that no longer needed translation. She didn't flinch as the engine stabilized. Her fingers moved quickly, cleanly, confirming readings out of instinct, not caution. Every system blinked green, then held steady. The tower gave her clearance over the radio. She didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Rachel taxied out, the nose wheel turning with smooth resistance beneath her touch. Her hand rested on the throttle with a familiarity that had taken years to build. As she rolled past the line of hangars, she caught a glimpse of a single crewman watching through a dusted windscreen. The rest of the base looked still, paused in the heat. At the runway threshold, she brought the jet to a full stop. The silence inside the cockpit was broken only by the low drone of the electronics and the faint hiss of airflow against the canopy. She checked the targeting package once briefly, then centered her grip and flexed her right hand. She pushed the throttle forward, Afterburner kicked in with a muted boom behind her. The fighter surged ahead, wheels screaming across the concrete, acceleration building fast. Rachel said nothing. Her gaze stayed level as the blur of desert pulled beneath her, then fell away entirely. The sky didn't welcome her. It made no promises. She climbed anyway. Rachel skimmed the edge of a canyon wall, her left wingtip no more than a breath from the crumbling rock. The desert below fractured into ridges and dry veins of chalk and rust, the remains of ancient riverbeds now reduced to scar lines on the earth. Her jet moved as if threaded through the terrain, too fast to track, too low to mark. Heat shimmer warped the horizon, turning sky and ground into a smear of melted glass. Inside the cockpit, her breath pulsed faintly in her ears, a steady counter-rhythm to the hum of systems and metal under stress. She hadn't spoken since takeoff. There was nothing to say. The flight plan lived inside her. Not in the instruments. It was muscle and memory. Not guesswork. When the GPS flickered, she didn't react. Her course was already set by the topography burned into her head. One glance ahead told her everything she needed. The first early warning radar pings arrived like whispers, soft pulses along the edge of her threat scope. Faint, then gone. She reduced throttle just enough to suppress her signature, but didn't lose speed. Up ahead, a series of sharp granite outcrops loomed over the valley. Her HUD suggested a rise. She ignored it and went low, threading between stone pillars that hadn't seen rain in a century. Terrain following sensors offered suggestions. Rachel took her own line instead. A canyon break twisted sharply left. She rolled into the turn without hesitation. The aircraft responded instantly, G-force pressing hard into her ribs and shoulders. Her glove tightened over the stick, steady and exact. Wind buffeted from the right, shoving her closer to the rock wall. She corrected with one tap on the rudder. No waste, no drift. No voice filled her headset. No radar uplink followed her path. She had moved past the range of support systems. What command could see was hours old. What she saw was now. She glanced at a ridge marker, a twisted section of sand-colored basalt, and adjusted her bearing by 2 degrees. Not from the HUD, from memory. Another radar ping. Stronger. Closer. She didn't flinch. Instead, she toggled her defensive suite to passive mode and let the signal bounce across her rear scope. No missile yet. They were tracking, not firing. Rachel stayed low, still invisible, but only just. The sun climbed higher, light washing over the canyon with a blinding angle. Shadows shortened. The terrain grew harsher. She passed over a dry gully with sun-bleached cables half buried in sand. A cloud of birds scattered as she blew past. The heat inside the cockpit had grown stifling, sweat running along her jawline beneath the helmet seal. She let it drip. From the rear camera, a flicker. She tapped the zoom control. 2 dots, then 3. Enemy fighters. Gaining. The radar tracked them now. She knew the formation staggered, fast, with wide coverage. They had launched early. She was being bracketed. Not yet engaged, but marked. Her instructor's voice surfaced in the back of her mind, a phrase she had heard on her first live run. You're always the slowest thing on someone's radar. Rachel didn't smile. She just held altitude. A new tone cracked across her panel. Sam's sight. Close. Too close. The lock alert climbed in intensity, but only for a second. One of the launchers was masking behind a rock shelf, partially hidden. Rachel banked hard left, pressing into the canyon's shadow line. The alert blinked once more, then disappeared. No launch. She had flown under it just in time. She stabilized and moved faster. The enemy fighters were closer now. Her system painted them clearly 3 contacts, vectoring in from separate angles. They would have tone in moments. Still, she did not climb. The bomb run was almost here. If she turned to fight now, the mission was lost. The target would escape behind a wall of terrain and signal jamming. The opening would close forever. She pushed forward. Below her, the landscape flattened. The final ridge dropped away. The terrain opened into a wide, burned expanse dotted with debris, fencing, and camouflage netting stretched tight over vehicles. At the center sat the compound, low buildings with sloped roofs, a makeshift tower, and rows of transport trucks idling along a path barely wide enough to carry them all. It looked like every other remote outpost Rachel had seen from above. But this one held the target. The targeting pod locked, her HUD lit green. The box formed and stabilized, centered over the largest structure. No movement yet, no signal that they knew she was here. Rachel opened the cover on the bomb release switch. Her hand hovered over it. The fighter's nose dropped fractionally as she aligned the strike. Behind her, a rising chorus of tones. The enemy fighters had locked. She did not flinch. She did not turn. She did not speak. Her eyes stayed fixed on the target, thumb poised. Let them come. The reticle blinked solid green. Rachel pressed her thumb against the release switch with calm finality. 2 guided bombs dropped clean from their pylons, their fins snapping open as they curved downward through the thick shimmer. She held the aircraft steady through a 3 count, watching the angle confirm on the HUD. Then she pulled hard into a climb. The nose rose sharply. The sky ahead turned blinding white. Gravity pressed against her chest as the ground vanished below. Her threat alerts screamed in her headset, alarms competing in volume. She silenced them manually. Not disabled. Just quieted. Enough to think. Through the frame of the rear camera feed, she caught the first shockwave bloom upward in silence. Then came the sound muted and dense, more sensation than volume, as it rolled through the body of the aircraft. One structure inside the compound folded inward, collapsing in sections. A fireball leapt out across the netting and tore through a row of parked trucks. Plumes of dust and debris curled into the air like unraveling rope. Secondary flashes chased each other across the center courtyard. The entire command site had been shattered. Rachel exhaled once. She didn't speak. 3 enemy aircraft now closed from behind. Her HUD tracked them in formation. One fighter had already gained lock and fired. Rachel snapped left, released 2 countermeasures, and watched the sky behind her light up with twin streaks. One missile passed clean, overhead. The others delayed, waiting for cleaner solutions. She climbed again, trading speed for position. It wouldn't last, but it gave her altitude, and with it, visibility. Then she saw it, from behind the smoke. A second aircraft lifted into view. Smaller, faster, twin-engine transport. The body was dark, heat warped, low contrast paint to blend with the haze. It had cleared the far perimeter on a hidden strip carved just beyond the main compound. Its wheels left the ground with a jolt. The nose pitched forward. Its engines burned hot. Someone was trying to run. Rachel flattened her ascent and rolled to center. One of the enemy fighters closed the gap. She locked, fired, and watched her missile track in tight a fast, sharp arc into the target's belly. The explosion came hard, fast, no trailing wreckage. Just a bloom and then a break of parts in the wind. The remaining fighters stayed behind her. Their angle closed. Rachel dropped into a dive, forcing them to follow. Her warning system lit with a fresh lock. It wasn't airborne. It came from the ground. To the east, a mobile SAM battery had powered on. She ignored the signal. She couldn't afford to turn. Not yet. The transport was gaining speed. It had turned east, already pulling into a high climb, nose pointed toward clear sky. No escort, no defenses. They were betting on stealth and distance. Rachel toggled to visual targeting. Her HUD flickered with static from the jamming. She didn't try to correct it. She adjusted manually, flying without overlays, trimming the pitch with one hand while calculating angles in her head. Distance, crosswind, elevation. She steadied the aircraft with her knees locked tight. Her right hand floated over the final rail trigger. Behind her, the fighters continued to close. Her radar flashed yellow, then red. Missile tone returned. It whined inside her helmet. She ignored it. Her eyes stayed on the escaping transport. The heat trail blurred its outline, but she saw enough. She focused past the distortion. She flew the gap. She fired. The missile left the rail without ceremony. No burst of sound, just sudden absence. She tracked it with her eyes. One arc, one correction, then a hit direct into the center of the fuselage. The transport cracked in half, flame pouring out in two directions. The tail fell away first, then the wings peeled back. The entire aircraft folded into the clouds of dust it had tried to rise above. Rachel didn't smile. She banked away. The fighters behind her grew bolder. One fired. Another closed tighter. Cannon fire whispered past her canopy. She dove again, sharp and immediate, dropping low over uneven terrain. The radar lock shifted. She pulled harder. Heat spilled into the cockpit, a warning lit engine temp spike, fuel flow erratic. Still she flew. She dropped below radar level, just inside the top line of the ridgeline. Scrub trees and dry grass flickered past. A cluster of low boulders blurred beneath her nose. She kept the wings steady. The engine coughed once, then recovered. Alarms rang again, not critical yet, but close. The rear camera still showed smoke rising from the base. Through its haze, nothing moved. The commander's aircraft would not land. The base no longer stood. The fighters chasing her were behind schedule, forced to climb again. She had slipped their net, if only for now. She cut throttle to minimum and let the aircraft ride the low wind, easing into a thermal draft that let her level out near the base of the canyon wall. The silence was almost full now, just the thrum of metal stress and the low hum of systems trying to keep up. Rachel did not speak. She did not change expression. Her flight path was burned into the sky, marked by smoke trails, scorch marks, and a dozen broken targets. And she was still flying, toward what came next. Rachel kept her nose pointed toward the falling wreckage, confirming with her eyes what her systems could no longer show. The transport had gone down hard. Smoke spiraled from the canyon wall where the debris had scattered across the slope in flame. No signals. No movement. The target was gone. Then the next threat arrived. Her radar lit with overlapping tones. This time, not just from the air. A second wave of SAM sites had activated across the valley mouth, directly ahead of her projected escape path. The system screamed a full priority lock. Rachel banked right and dropped into a cut between ridgelines. The new path barely cleared a ridge of shale and wind-polished sand. The lock held. A missile launched. She toggled countermeasures and dropped flares mid-turn. Two bright bursts spiraled off her tail. The first missile followed a flare and vanished in a cloud of light. The second held its course. Rachel pulled altitude, skimmed the edge of a boulder shelf, and twisted beneath the next rise. The missile hesitated for a breath, then veered wide and exploded against a rock face. The flash turned her canopy white for half a second. She blinked once. The image cleared. Her hands never left the controls. But her countermeasure count was nearly gone. If another lock came, she had nothing left to give it. A second pulse rippled through the cockpit. Her HUD went dark. Power dropped across the panel. Rachel checked the side displays. Multiple sensor failures. One processor down. The second overheating. Cooling flow stuck open. Her alert panel flashed a warning for avionics degradation, then rebooted on its own. She smelled burned insulation through her oxygen mask. She didn't slow. Through the canopy glass, the sky stretched flat and brutal. Sunlight pushed through dust and carbon smoke, giving every ridge a flickering edge. Rachel pulled the visor down and let the aircraft ride just above the contours. No altitude margin. No instruments. She flew by instinct and visual range. Another flash to the east. She caught it off center. Wrong shape, wrong path. A single aircraft, light and fast, trying to mask its escape. Not part of the intercept group. It moved with purpose, just outside the expected pattern. She followed. The aircraft banked to run, but too late. It hadn't expected her to still be airborne. She adjusted course with a smooth arc, nose flat, throttle steady. Her controls responded slower now, each surface moving with effort. The hydraulics were lagging. Response time was fading. She opened the cover on her last missile rail. The housing was cracked. The indicator showed no lock. The system had stopped offering help. Rachel didn't wait. She centered the target visually, aligning it between two scratches on her canopy. She leveled her wings and flew parallel, letting the path settle into her bones. Distance, angle, wind. She calculated everything herself. She fired. The missile kicked free, unannounced, no sound, no visual, just the vibration of weight leaving steel. It streaked toward the fleeing jet. There was no lock, no guidance. It hit anyway. The enemy aircraft took the strike just below the engine. One wing folded, the other snapped wide and tore free. The fuselage twisted in the air, became fire, and dropped in a slow spiral into the desert below. When it hit, there was no flare, just dust and a shadow. Rachel peeled away from the plume and turned back toward the canyon floor. But the damage had caught up to her. Smoke vented behind the canopy seals. One of the internal oxygen scrubbers ruptured, and a fine gray haze filled the space behind her helmet. The canopy frame cracked from heat stress. Small fissures lined the upper edge of the dashboard. One of the side panels popped and hung loose. She dropped again, flying just above the terrain. No signal, no data, just low wind and heat bouncing off the rock. Her alerts returned in a final cascade. Electrical draw critical, fuel below threshold, systems degraded. She shut off every non-essential function, manually pulling circuit breakers by feel. Still, she flew. No comms, no uplink, no AWACS. If anyone was watching, they couldn't reach her. The only sound was the pulse of the airframe under pressure and the faint whine of the last functioning intake. Below, the landscape shifted to a narrow draw. She found its center line and rode the drop, following a dry stream bed framed by rock on both sides. Her aircraft rattled from nose to tail, but the control held. Sunlight cut across the panel in thin slats. Her visor was streaked now, salt and soot clinging to the edge. Her eyes burned. She blinked twice and stayed on course. There were no more targets, no more strikes. The mission was done. But she did not stop. Every motion of her hand had weight. Every shift of her boot on the rudder mattered. The aircraft no longer obeyed, she forced it. When the throttle stuck, she stabilized it with her elbow. When the stick pushed back, she held it forward. No panic, no brakes, just flight. The valley passed in long shadows. The engine burned unevenly, smoke trailing in long curls behind her. She watched the canyon walls open wider, light spilling back across the ground. The jet was breaking down, but Rachel was not. The canyon stretched ahead of her like a broken seam. Rachel held the glide steady, the stick vibrating under her palm. The engine wheezed behind her, the tone uneven. Low-pressure fuel alarms blinked in and out across the center panel, which had started dimming along its edges. The right intake made a hollow rattle in the turbulence. The aircraft felt brittle, like it had been flown past its natural limit and was waiting for her to let go. She checked the terrain again. The riverbed below was uneven, narrow in places, sloped on both sides, but it was the only option she had. It widened just enough at one stretch. No runway, no margin, just dirt, shale, and scattered brush. She didn't hesitate. Rachel flipped open the manual trim panel. The automated systems had gone silent nearly 5 minutes earlier. Her left hand moved through the toggles one at a time, trimming the descent manually. The wings shuddered under the flap change, hydraulic assist lagging as the jet pitched slightly right. She corrected, eased back into centerline, altitude dropping, airspeed falling. There was no time for another pass. She dumped fuel. The gauge flickered low, then blinked and went dark. Smoke curled into the canopy. The lower instruments were out completely. One frozen screen still showed terrain she had passed 10 minutes ago. Another blinked a static gray and faded. She didn't bother looking again. The riverbed loomed. Rachel dropped gear out of habit, knowing it wouldn't respond. It didn't. She leaned slightly into the seat, not bracing but aligning herself. Her right boot adjusted the rudder. Her eyes stayed forward. The moment arrived without warning. Contact was instant and violent. The aircraft slammed into the canyon floor, nose gear folding with a deep snap. The fuselage bucked and twisted, sending a shower of sparks across the rocks. One wing clipped a rise of stone and tore loose in a screaming wrench of metal. The jet skidded sideways, frame grinding against the ground. Dust and dirt sprayed up in a wall as it spun half a turn, then rocked hard to the left and came to rest. Silence followed. Inside the cockpit, Rachel's helmet knocked lightly against the headrest. Her visor had cracked diagonally. She reached up, found the battery cut off by touch, and threw it. The airframe groaned once as power drained. She moved slowly, checking limbs as she unlocked the harness. Her knee ached. No brake, no blood. Her shoulder had slammed the console but still moved. The canopy release jammed. She tried again. It popped on the second pull. Heat poured into the cockpit, thick with the scent of scorched wiring, hydraulic fluid, and dust. She sat for a moment, eyes closed behind the cracked visor, then pushed it open and climbed out over the side of the broken frame. The canyon was still. No echoes. No rotors. No boots on gravel. Just the breeze and the gentle ticking of metal cooling down in the sun. Rachel stepped onto the dirt. Her foot sank half an inch into the soft shale. She tested the other leg. It held. Her gloves were darkened with soot. Her sleeves were torn at the elbows. She scanned the horizon. Nothing moved. The wreck lay behind her in uneven pieces. One wing lodged against a jagged rock. The tail section was buried at a crooked angle near a dry log. A strip of landing gear had sheared off and rested near a bent engine shroud. There were no flames, only smoke. She walked 10 steps away and set her helmet down in the dust. The ground was warm through her boots. Her hands hung loose by her sides. She turned in a slow arc, searching the ridgeline, not for help or rescue, just to understand where she had landed. Rachel sat on a flat boulder facing the wreck. Her legs were heavy now, but not shaking. She adjusted the harness at her chest and loosened one glove. The other stayed on. Her breathing returned to normal. No words came. None were needed. Behind her, the jet made no sound. Only the quiet hiss of hot metal and the occasional pop of contracting steel. Her checklist was still folded in the seat pocket, untouched. She glanced once at the sky. It was pale and empty. Then she looked down at her gloves and let her hands rest on her thighs. She had not arrived with ceremony. She had simply landed. The pickup came just before the heat reached its peak. Rachel heard the rotor wash before she saw the aircraft. A forward team descended in a compact tilt rotor, blades slicing the sky with brutal efficiency. Dust spiraled into the canyon, blotting the ground in a brown haze. One crewman jumped down, weapons slung, eyes scanning like they expected to find chaos still unfolding. But Rachel was already standing. Her flight suit was streaked with grit and ash. Her gloves were darkened from smoke. Her visor had been removed, and the cracked helmet hung loosely from her left hand. In the other, still folded neatly, was her checklist. She gave a single nod as she stepped toward them. No limp, no questions, no backward glance. They didn't ask if she was hurt. She didn't say if she was. Inside the tilt rotor, no one spoke. The team gave her space. She buckled herself in and stared straight ahead. The canyon faded behind them, but Rachel didn't watch it disappear. Back at the forward base, the air was still heavy with late-day heat. A pair of medics stood waiting near the landing pad, their gloves already on. Rachel stepped down the ramp before it fully extended. The crew chief moved to guide her toward the aid station. But she shook her head. Once. The message was clear. She passed through the archway and into the shaded corridor of operations. Her suit bore the marks of the fight-torn fabric at one shoulder, faint burns near the forearm seams, a patch of dried fluid near the lower rib where the instrument panel had ruptured. Her boots left small traces of red canyon dust on the polished floor. The debrief room was quiet. No screens lit, no chatter, just a metal table and 4 chairs. Rachel sat when instructed. She placed the helmet beside her and the checklist flat on the table. It stayed closed. The lead officer asked for her account. She gave it. She recited the flight plan deviations. She listed the radar contact points. She detailed the timing of the bomb release, the vector of her secondary strike, and the location of the final missile impact. She named the threats, described the weapons expended, and confirmed the enemy commander's aircraft was destroyed in flight. Her voice never rose, never fell. It moved forward like her aircraft had clean, necessary, controlled. When she finished, the officer removed his glasses and studied her for a moment longer than needed. He folded his hands and said, "Your actions ensured the target was neutralized. The mission was executed under extreme conditions, and your decisions in flight were." "I completed the mission," Rachel said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look up. It was not a dismissal. It was a conclusion. The officer nodded once. There was nothing more to ask. Later, after sunset, the base quieted. Sodium lights glowed dimly over the ramp. The buzz of cooling systems hummed beneath the silence. Most of the personnel had turned in. Only the maintenance crews moved slowly between hangars, checking inventory, prepping flight lines for morning runs. Rachel stepped out from the barracks alone. Her hair was still tied back in a single tight braid. Her flight suit had been changed. Her boots were cleaned, but scuffed at the toe. Her gloves hung from her belt. She walked past the empty airframes parked near the tower and turned down the far row. A new F-16 waited near the edge of the tarmac. Its skin was clean, untouched by heat or soot. The thermal cover still clung to the canopy. A small team had run diagnostics earlier but were now gone. The area was empty. Rachel approached without changing pace. Her footsteps echoed lightly on the concrete. She passed the ladder without pausing. The helmet she carried remained at her side. Her checklist was still folded in her hand. It had never been used. She hadn't needed it. She stopped a few feet from the nose of the aircraft and tilted her head back. Above her, the sky was clear. No rotors, no engines, no urgency. Stars were starting to show through the last of the heat haze. They shimmered faintly, distant and unbothered. Rachel didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She simply looked. The aircraft waited behind her. The checklist remained folded, and Rachel stood still, as quiet and prepared as she had been the morning she launched.